Welcome back. This is part 3 of our Angular Bootcamp curriculum session. So, unfortunately, Lance informed us that PT Tweaks 4 did not, in fact, pass the build.
Oh man, we have a twist now.
It's a
Dun,
twist.
dun, dun.
A switch on the switch.
So by the way, I'm actually numbering these just sequentially all the way through. So the number 3 you said will have no bearing to the number that appears at the top of this. Isn't that cool?
That is good to know.
It might be 7, it might be 4. I don't know either.
What failed?
Wait,
one
one
of
of
two.
two.
One of two.
Boo.
PT Tweaks 3 passed, but 4, no, that was too much to ask.
Wait, what? We didn't change anything, did we?
We squashed and rebased.
Oh.
You gotta kind of like scroll down. It's actually hidden. It's not hidden to the right. It's actually like you gotta scroll
I can't scroll anymore.
inside the yarn
Inside
section.
the box.
I can't.
Yeah.
Well, no,
scroll.
that's the whole error.
What?
That's the whole error. It says error and unexpected error
It
occurred.
failed to hit rerun up at the
Just-
top.
Yeah,
Cores,
I think-
Cores at latest is trying to unlock,
Yeah,
No,
unpack
hit
in the same
rerun.
distance. Yeah,
Top.
yeah.
there's 2 parts.
It looks like the
First,
pipeline.
this will simply rerun
Oh,
the
there
same
we- there
thing.
it is.
Turn it off and turn it back on again.
But it doesn't matter because we just
Yep.
saw the same commit pass, so we can just move on. But if you cared, you wanted to look at that previous one, I think it was just like a momentary glitch of the NPM servers,
Yeah.
which is
Probably.
no big deal. You just run it again.
That never happens.
For some values of never.
It was a joke.
All right, so here we're actually about to see whether or not it actually gets past this. We just like wait a couple seconds.
Or
Same
A couple of
warnings,
seconds.
but not errors.
long enough for 30 to 50 feral hogs to go
There is
through.
there is a growing movement
I just dated this.
to
video.
Of
Yeah,
30 to
it
50
got
feral
passed.
hogs.
Hey.
there's a growing movement to basically what they call it vendor your dependencies here, where your CI would run in a mode that
It got
Yarn or
messed
NPM does not talk to the network. So that is interesting. There's a space robustness trade-off. It'd be very cool.
All
All
right.
right, well, let's go back to
Yeah,
our repos.
yeah, we can go back to work.
Or our branches.
up. It worked. Right, it got past the error.
Yep.
So it's likely to work from here. This was what we
All right. So next up on our list is the error handling V2. That one actually is my branch, even though it's attributed to
Yes.
Zachary. Just squashing can sometimes, if you're not paying close attention, you get weird results.
Cool.
We actually had already reviewed this 2 weeks ago, and it just
Oh, yeah, this
never
one.
went through, or waiting for more stuff to build up to bother with the master commit. So this is just going to have to be rebased, and then we can.
I've
Shall we
not
bother
actually
rebasing
seen
it,
what
or
this
just-
change does. What is the actual change? Because I know this is one I've whined about in the past, but never gotten around to fixing. So what are we doing in this
We're
change?
getting rid of a lot.
So yeah, we're like there's a whole lot of just kind of noise for what was actually like signal noise ratio was like really low on this step. And so what we did was like, hey, how about we just kind of like do what we actually do in projects, and instead of having this weird thing where when there's an error we just kind of like return some fake data, how about instead we like annotate the pipeline with like metadata about where it's at in the process. And so as a result, you can then kind of choose how to consume that annotated observable in a here's your in progress, here's your data version, here's your error version. That way you can appropriately show spinners or error messages or content.
Well, I'm definitely all
As it comes
for
through.
everything that you're saying. I'm a little bit concerned that we might have lost an important message in here, though. The reason we had the poll 1 versus poll 2 is that there is a subtle but very important difference between poll 1 and poll 2 that actually either kills what you're doing or doesn't kill what you're doing. Do we
Pull 1 catch errors and pull 2 doesn't. So if it fails once, it's dead forever, right?
I think it was the other way around. It was the idea that you had the catch in a different place, like associated with an internal observable, like the side channel for handling errors versus the main channel.
Interesting.
And if we've lost that, then we've lost the point of this example.
Well,
Ooh.
I would say that is a good thing to have, but I don't think it should be in a. Well, I don't know. I guess it is part of the idea of observable error handling, but like we missed the thing that fundamentally people are expecting to see and care about, which is like, how do I put an error message on the page in response to that error?
And that has always been my complaint with this example. But I don't want to throw out one baby to get another baby. So I
was a strange
I want
analogy.
both of these things.
We
to
keep
happen.
all babies here. We
Keep
do
all
not
the
throw out
babies.
Any babies.
Babies
Yeah,
good.
okay.
We like babies.
Yeah.
But you see what I'm saying? That,
Yeah.
That the
Yeah.
reason that I teach this example, and admittedly I've hand waved the part where it's like, and yeah, we're returning fake data. Don't pay any attention to that. what I actually want to show you is where the catch lives here. Which observable
So we need
it's
both
associated
things.
with. We need both of
So
those
the
things.
only question is, does it make sense to have like one step which is like observable error handling or observable error display? Maybe this one is like observable progress and error display. Maybe this one gets that name, and maybe observable error handling is a cleaned up version of the old thing to illustrate.
Yeah, however we end up doing it, and it's probably going to take a couple of iterations to figure out the
Yeah.
right way to do it. I don't want to lose the thing that this example currently does that's good.
Yeah.
I'd like
Yeah.
to fix the thing that does that's not good,
Yeah.
and maybe that's a separate step where we're like, okay, now that we've shown you that subtle but important piece of information
Yeah.
about error handling, here's how you really do it well.
Yeah.
I think that in order to get what you're looking for, you could just combine the two. I think that would be reasonable.
Like put a catch error on the switch map and then like live codes swapping it out. Like
Well, so
moving it
you
or
would,
something.
I would starting from what it was before, but
Well,
then do the so you're going and fetching things every 2 seconds.
Yeah, that's too much noise.
That's too much noise, you think?
Yeah, like that's just noise. That's noise in the signal to noise ratio of this step.
I have taught this very successfully. I like this example up to the point where it doesn't like actually show you good
So
Error
UI.
handling, yeah.
I think we can split the baby on this one.
No.
Okay, so for the case of showing the importance of if you do it right, if it fails, it just fails once and it keeps going. And if you do it wrong, it fails and it's dead forever. The polling is perfect for that, right?
Yeah, and that's,
But for the case of, hey, I just want to show how to show progress and errors well, the polling is a distraction to that.
I totally
So I was suggesting either this one example should have two different kind of little features in it, or there should be two totally different steps with names that reflect the two different ideas we're trying to teach.
Yeah, and that's
one
why
way
I'm
or
not
another.
taking a strong position on what to do
Yeah.
with this one. I just don't want to lose that important,
Yeah.
error handling off
Yeah.
to one side.
Here's two
to not
names to
kill the
catalyze
thing.
around. Error reporting and
Yes.
error recovery.
How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
So, would the person who started this, you?
That was me.
Go ahead. Would you split? Do you want to
I'd
split
make
it here
a-
together, or do you want to go? How do we do
let's
this?
go through the. We got half an hour here. Like these are pretty
28
well,
minutes till beer o'clock.
Well established. Just go into it.
Do
Let's
we
just
have
try it.
any other
Make sure you're on the branch.
other branches that we need to cover?
Oh, so Lance
I'd
is
like to see
so
my brain.
we do have this trade-off. We do, right? Since I was about to say if there's a class coming up, there are so many classes. There is
Yes.
always a class coming up.
There's always
We
a
do
class.
try to get like small, low-hanging things through our pipeline, so the person teaching the next class can enjoy it.
But the answer is no at the moment. There's not
So,
other
okay,
branches
okay.
here
I
that
mean,
are.
there's mine.
So we're safe to spend the
Here's
rest.
your
form
what?
validity checks.
My form validity checks.
That feels small.
It's very small. It's me like swapping out bang valid.
Do you
versus
want to look
invalid.
at that one and
Is
see
that
if that could
literally
go
all
in?
it is?
Yeah, for every single HTML file that has a form.
Yeah.
Because for some
Okay.
reason we have
Good, we
bang
can
valid.
argue about that.
Let's go take a look at it.
I mean, if,
do
if
a
it's something we
control
don't want,
Yeah.
it's fine.
It costs
Just-
one character to
Ooh.
type out invalid
There's
versus
really
bang valid,
invalid.
so the concision is lost.
Oh, not the prettier one.
The
Like,
Sonar Cube one is also really small.
Yeah, we actually. I think
Oh,
you
it's
need to
not.
Go back. Yeah, no, that one's not at all. Go back and watch last
You know,
week's
valid
episode.
versus-
There's a reason to do. Oh, bang valid.
Some of those are just prettier randomly, but
But
Should we
yeah.
look at the previous commit then? That says use invalid.
Something like that.
Invalid.
Like this one?
Well,
This one?
you should be able. So, the stuff that's in master should already pass prettier. So the diffs that we look at, should always be post. Like, there's very little reason to ever commit code that doesn't pass prettier. Like your IDE should have one character. It's like I'm saying, why is there a separate commit for prettier? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
I don't know. My prettier did one thing and another thing like re-changed it back. So
Yeah, what Paul and I actually discovered earlier today that prettier as integrated with the linting, the behavior is slightly different from the prettier fix.
Awesome.
And
yeah, that's what I discovered too.
yeah. So yeah.
What your editor does, if configured like properly, to like respect both, is different from because there is no just plain run prettier following lint command that I know of. Like it obviously must exist for the add-in to exist, but
Wow.
I don't know how to invoke prettier to say first adhere to lint rules and then pick up the remaining prettier rules afterwards.
Do you remember earlier today when I was saying, hey, is there a really quick, easy way in our current configuration to aim the prettier gun at one file?
Yeah.
Because what I was doing was
Right.
saving and not formatting and just letting prettier do everything. Well, it turns out that if you do that, you have a different result than what Paul was getting in VS Code plus then using prettier.
I'm just going to cross my fingers and hope that the upstream makers of these tools resolve this for us,
I'm
because
sure
I
they're watching
don't
this
want to
video
have to
with great
say.
interest.
I'm sure they are. But I can still hope that they.
On this particular thing, here's one of those discussions we can have. In class, I will often point out the fact that we have two senses of, dirty, pristine, valid, invalid,
Right.
touched, untouched, all those things. And I honestly don't know why that's the case. It may just be legacy holdover from the AngularJS days. But one of the things I often recommend is be consistent. Doesn't really matter where you land, but be consistent. So
Right, and we use invalid elsewhere.
So the reason I'm not happy with this change is it's not a dichotomy. It's not valid versus invalid. It's valid pending invalid.
Ooh.
So if these are all synchronous validations, then it's a dichotomy. But if there are any asynchronous things, then we do not want the button to be enabled while it's still pending.
This is an
Wow.
extremely good point.
I am so glad we have
All
an
of these
expert in the
happen
room.
to be synchronous validations in the
At least in
401 and in the dynamic, although I wouldn't
But
depend on
402, 702 is definitely
But
not.
you should code
Code as if you
Assuming,
don't
yeah.
know
as
that.
if you don't know.
Right.
But I actually have a further reason. That's not even the only reason. That's better than my reason.
I kind of just want to sit for a minute and appreciate that.
Yeah,
Seriously, let's go back and
applaud.
And I want to credit Joshua on that.
Okay,
He's the one who
okay.
told me about that.
He's not in the room. Let's give Lance
Explain
credit.
that a little bit thoroughly. So we can,
Okay, so it looks like valid versus invalid are the only two states. So it looks like not valid is just a more complicated way of doing invalid. But in fact, and if you're doing synchronous validation, which is the simple type of validation we usually show, that's true. But if you're doing asynchronous validation while the call is going to the backend or doing whatever, it's neither valid nor invalid, but it is in a third state called pending.
Right.
So if we make the change that is on the screen right now, then while the change is pending, the button will be enabled.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure we don't want that.
So we can't. This change is not okay as it is.
Yes.
Until that's dealt with.
I did not expect this to be where the conversation went, but man, I'm glad it went here.
You're gonna like my other reason.
Okay.
So the other reason, I heard this somewhere, the reason why there's these things, like why do they need both, is that those actually match class names that get thrown on automatically by Angular.
Mhm.
Well, yeah,
And
you have the NG valid,
right.
NG dirty,
So
NG pristine.
you don't want to have to write a CSS rule that says the lack of the so-and-so class. So
Right.
they have all the different directions represented positively by a flag
So you
and
have to use
positively
the
by
colon not in your
right
CSS
by a
objects.
like-named class to make it just really, really easy to CSS up your
yeah, but we actually
Forms.
can't take advantage of what Lance unpacked for us just now because of that. Because
no, you would
you take advantage of the pending state.
Yeah,
you would
Yeah.
you'd make a
Pending
pending
state.
class that
Yeah.
overlays a spinner.
Well, and there is an NG pending
Yeah.
class.
Yeah,
that-
yeah.
So I think the answer really quickly becomes, Zachary, you could take another spin at this. To I think it is the right answer that we just go back and acknowledge the pending state.
I think
Like
that's
Well, I don't think there is
I don't
a
think
way,
so.
a reasonable way to do that in a synchronous set of validations, but we do have the
Yeah.
async validation.
702.
Yeah, the
702
custom
I can
validator.
use.
yeah.
So can we
Yeah.
do it this way in the synchronous ones and the other way in the async ones?
Oh,
Or do
well,
we
I
just
know
do it
from
all the
literally
same
every
way?
class I teach from now on, I will be talking about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
Yeah,
furthermore,
that's
I don't think you should I think you're committing an error if you take advantage of knowing
Yeah.
that this thing is only going to be validated synchronously when you decide this stuff, because that what you're saying is, and if any aspect of this ever becomes asynchronous, I am so smart, I'm going to remember to go back and review all these other decisions
Well, and
to look and see if I took the
that
shortcut
is even
about
assuming
synchronicity.
that you're the one that does that. You know, this is classic defense in
Well,
depth.
and by we, I mean us,
Yeah.
the team as a whole. The whole
Yeah.
team working on this is going to be so on the ball that when somebody else makes a certain thing asynchronous, they're going to go back and carefully review every one of these. And
Right.
I'm not diligent enough to do that.
Yeah,
And so if I'm on your team, the condition
This
does not
actually
hold.
leads to a slightly larger discussion. There is a status field
Yeah.
And that status field, because these are Booleans, the valid,
Yeah,
invalid,
yeah,
and all that.
yeah.
And it makes me wonder if perhaps we should start encouraging the use of status as opposed to these Booleans that aren't quite Booleans. They're actually
I've
closer to
started to use
tri-states.
status changes more often too.
Yeah.
Because there's also the difference where, like, invalid and valid, since they are booleans, they can actually change after view in it.
Right.
So, or after view change, which you can actually get some of those weird errors that we get.
Yeah.
A
What
lot
if
because of that.
What if the right answer was to make the button look disabled by have the button be disabled by default, and have an enable, right? A class dot enabled.
The problem is that disabled, like the new line 129 there, that is the HTML or
Yeah.
the DOM
That's the
property
DOM.
disabled.
Yeah.
So the way HTML and the DOM
Yeah.
actually work is to say, yes, this is disabled, which I hate,
Yeah.
but it is.
Well, I mean, the default for all elements are enabled because otherwise, why put it there? You know, if the default is disabled.
Cool.
And I
So we're
will
stuck
say,
with it.
when I taught this class, the first few times I'd come to this and say, it's kind of silly that we're saying not invalid. And then I did that once, and Joshua was in class with me. He's like, actually, no, and this is why.
Wow.
Oh, okay. So he knew. So yeah, I used to make that, and now I say that every time when I come here that there's a reason for it.
This
Do we
is like
have-
something that should go into the instructor notes for this
Yeah,
stuff.
That's a good point.
Definitely.
This is yours?
This is mine.
Yours?
And is there
Yeah.
a link into the like the Angular documentation that points that out too?
Well, I'm sure we have the link to the reactive forms documentation, but I don't know if the reactive forms docs actually calls this out. It probably, mentions it as at least an aside.
Right.
But, if people read documentation, they wouldn't come to our class.
Right.
The
Well,
point was the skip pass was so you're dealing with edit, right?
Yeah.
So your responsibility includes both making sure it's right according to this new knowledge, but also the instructor notes for here
Yeah.
describe what's been done and why in some very concise way, so that the subset of us that is diligent enough to read those instructor notes and who's not in the room and didn't watch this is going to pick up this change and start saying the right thing in class.
Did we want to go the defensive path of doing
I think
Not
that's
valid.
sense.
Okay.
So I think
so not valid and just update the notes?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
And there may be spots that we have to change invalid to not valid.
yeah.
Okay,
so
yeah,
I
I
think
can do that too. Because
Yeah.
I noticed things. I was just trying to make it consistent because we have invalid up
Yeah.
here, and it's like, why do we?
No, this has turned out to be super
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
and if there is a link, if there is documentation for backing this up, I have had people like want to know where that information comes from.
Yeah,
you can
that stuff.
demonstrate
So-
this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we
So having
don't
that
have
instruction notes
documentation,
would
we
be
can
good.
like live code a demonstration
Yeah,
of where
yeah.
this falls over.
Sure, but
Yeah,
I
it's
do
demonstrably
like having
built in,
in the instructor notes. It's pretty common for me to drop links in there.
Sure.
Like when you have the AngularJS refugees, they're always like, where did filter and sort by go? There is a specific section of the documentation that you can point people to that says, here's why we took that away from you, and that's really valuable.
Yeah.
So yeah, if there's a particular permalink that we can grab that is like, here, you need to know about this for the difference between valid, invalid, pending, etc.
Yeah, and maybe there's a fourth state that I'm not aware of, but I know about this.
It's quantum validation, Heisenbergian validation.
Well, you kind of think
Strange
of pending
validation.
state is a quantum superposition of whether
It was valid until you looked at it and you screwed it up.
All right, beer clock happens at 4 o'clock. Is it worth trying to dig into anything else? What time we got left, or are we going to go ahead and wrap this up?
Probably should wrap it.
All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it. So
Thanks for watching.
We love you.